Welcome to Suddenly Different, where we explore stories and strategies for life when it doesn't go to plan. I'm Leigh-Anne Charland, inviting you to join me on this journey. There are moments in life that quietly redraw the map of who we are. Loss does that, not just the loss of people we love, but the loss of certainty, identity, capacity, and the version of ourselves we thought we would always be. Welcome to Suddenly Different. Today's conversation is a gentle one, not because the topic is easy, but because safety matters when we speak about grief. My guest today is Sylvia Wolfer. Sylvia is a neuroscience-informed grief educator, writer, and speaker whose work explores how grief reshapes the brain, the nervous system, and our sense of self. But this conversation is not about moving on. It's about learning how to live well with complexity. Sylvia has lived with grief since childhood, including the sudden loss of her father, both brothers, and later her mother. Through both science and lived experience, she now teaches how we can develop steadiness, clarity, and agency, not despite grief, but with it. This is a conversation about loss, yes, but also about presence, about nervous system wisdom, and about what becomes possible when grief no longer runs the show. Take a breath. You are welcome here. Thank you, Sylvia, for being on Suddenly Different today.
Thank you so much, Leigh-Anne, for having me. It's an honor to be having this conversation with you today, and I'm very much looking forward to it.
It is hard when we lose our family of origin, isn't it?
Yes, it is very confusing because you really lose your stable base. You lose your origin, your roots, and what has made you and what has helped you to become. And when that happens from a very young age, it shifts your identity, and you lose innocence quite quickly because it takes away that notion of permanence, and it kind of pushes you to act and think beyond your age. When I lost my dad, I was 7, and it certainly changed me.
Before we speak about grief as a field of work, I'd love to begin with you and your story. When you shared details about yourself now, how do you understand your own story differently now to how you once did?
Yeah, so I think in my case, I've experienced grief from a young age. My dad died when I was 7, and then 10 years later, my younger brother died in a road accident very suddenly. I was 17, and then just before lockdown, I was in my late 30s. My older brother died also very suddenly, and then more recently, my mum. So I've lost a brother at 17 and then another one at 40, and it has certainly been a very different experience, even though the intensity and the pain was the same. I think I have maybe a more cognitive way to approach it now, and talking about it has helped me a lot as well. So what happened for me really was that I experienced grief without having any support when I was a teenager, and so the things that I was experiencing, the waves of grief and the distress and the bracing constantly, being like on alert constantly, I thought this is just how it is. This is what it does when you lose the people you love the most. So I had kind of capitulated. I thought, well, I just gonna have to live with that. But then by the time my older brother died, this really hit me because I realized that because of that unattended grief, I had lost a lot of time where I could have been more mindfully present with him. And this is where I got angry, and I thought, enough is enough. Enough is enough. I can't let grief run the show my whole life because I'm losing precious time with the people who are still here. And it sounds brutal, but I learned it the hard way. People die, but then other people die, and other people die, and other people die. So there is a way to regain some agency. It doesn't happen overnight, but there are tools. And this is now my mission, to help people understand how to manage grief, accept it, learn to live alongside it, but without letting it run the show.
Yes, because if we don't have skills or we don't have people around us to help us with our grief, because definitely in Australia, we have to push through it. I know when I lost my best friend to a terminal illness, I had people asking me if I was better yet. And I don't know that I'll ever be better from her passing, but I have strategies of coping with.
Yes, and that's very true. We are in a society, especially the Western world, where we're trying to rush the process, to rush grief, because people are illiterate when it comes to handling your own grief, their own grief, but also other people's grief. And it doesn't come from a bad place, but we are just in that rat race and in that a productivity wheel, and we just expect everyone to push through it and then be back to normal and function as they used to. But it is physically impossible. Grief affects the brain, it affects the body, it slows down our systems, our ability to focus, our ability to be productive. And this is not a lack of willingness. It's not that people don't want to, it's that really they can't. There's a brain fog that comes with grief because the body is on high alert. So the energy is just redirected towards survival, because grief is experienced as a threat, and all that energy is then missing for other things in life. And you're talking about that healing process that is being accelerated. Well, if someone breaks an arm, no one would ever say, can you please accelerate, the repair of your bone? Can you please heal faster? We wouldn't do that for a physical wound. So why are we expecting this from grief? And that's where conversations like the ones you have on your podcast are very important. We need to normalize the conversation and educate people about these facts, because it's not because people seem to function and show up and do what needs to be done that they are fine. Far from it.
Well, that's right, because there's a particular loneliness that you can have with grief, that you're feeling isolated from others because there's a lack of understanding.
Yes, that's very true. And, even though it's a very universal experience, everyone will face grief in a certain shape or form throughout their life. It is very isolating, and there is a loneliness that comes with it. And I found that the times I felt the most lonely was when I was surrounded by people. I sometimes found comfort in solitude, being on my own, where I was feeling less lonely than being surrounded by people who just didn't understand, because they didn't have the capacity and the knowledge, and the education. Especially as a child and a teenager, you feel very alone in that experience. And kids my age, they couldn't understand. It wasn't their fault. And that's where the adults in the room need to really have enough knowledge and confidence as well to talk to the children and to be supportive.
Well, I do notice that often children are left out of the conversation. There's whispering going on between the adults within the hearing of the children, and the children know something's going on, but they don't understand the gravity of it. And maybe it's better in 2025. I don't know. But, it's like, how do you explain to a child what's happening in the moment, but what's the lifetime experience of the loss of that person? I can't imagine what it was like for you. I know that the closest I've got is that my father was in the army, and he went away for 18 months at the beginning of my life and in another country. And then when he came back, I had that strange experience of losing someone and people mourning him not being there, and then him being back and he was a stranger. And that's my closest equivalent.
Yeah, what an interesting experience. And how did the adults around you handle that? Did you feel supported at that time?
Well, no, I think it was just move on. It's like, this is what we're doing. Because a lot of, especially, 60 years ago, children were an afterthought for how their nervous system or how their emotional being was reacting. We had to be quiet and good.
Yes, you're right. Back in the days, it was really most about being well behaved as a child. That was important. You had to be well behaved and then later on well educated. And it wasn't really about emotional development. That's very true. Well, I was 7, and I remember very vividly how all the adults were talking around me as if I wasn't there. And I made a promise to myself. I told myself, don't you ever forget that a 7-year-old child understands everything. And because it hurt me that they were speaking as if I didn't understand a word. And I always think of it whenever, I'm introduced to a child that happens to be 7, I'm like, okay, I know you understand everything. So what I think is important with children is my grandma did it very well. She spoke to me with real words. So not to make up things like, oh, your dad went to sleep, or because that can be very shocking for children. They might even be afraid to go to bed, So to just use real words, the body stopped functioning and he will not come back, not necessarily even make up things, he's in heaven, or just be open for their questions and open for their questions to be repetitive. Like just realize that for a child, it's very hard to integrate, and they might feel the urge to ask the same questions over and over and over again, and then just be patient and use age appropriate words to answer their questions, but simply and honestly.
Yeah. And that makes so much sense to me, because 7-year-old children do know. My granddaughter is almost 7 and she knows exactly what's going on. So I couldn't imagine trying to make up a story that wasn't true, because she knows the difference between truth and a lie.
Yes. And I remember I asked my grandma, I had these really precise questions because he died at that time. We thought he had died of a fall. And so I asked her, was it painful? Did he suffer? And she answered honestly. She said he probably did feel something. And to me, more than, the idea that, oh my God, my dad suffered, it was really more about, I can trust this adult talking to me. I can trust her because she's telling me the truth. And that notion of safety is extremely important. Even as adults, we need to feel safe to calm down and to gather our thoughts and to go forwards, So just being honest with a child without obviously giving like traumatic details will give them a sense of safety. It has to be age appropriate. But then again, there are also many charities specialized in child bereavement that people can go to if it does happen.
That's really good to know. I know with, some traumatic events, and the death of a parent or a sibling is very traumatic, that it's almost like part of you can get stuck in that age, in that moment, and your development can be inhibited by not dealing with the grief or not dealing with the understanding appropriately. Is that true?
Yes, it is. Like if as a child, for example, became hyper vigilant. I felt in charge of my mom as well, even more so when then my younger brother died. I took over that responsibility of looking after everyone, and you lose your innocence. And my nervous system was on alert for decades, but I didn't even realize it because I thought this was normal. I thought this is just how it is. This is just, a normal reaction to grief. And it's only later when my older brother died that I was so angry. And that's when I thought this is enough. But without the right support, it's very difficult to get out of that hypervigilance if you're faced with grief as a child.
Yes. And if you don't know that you need support and that there is support, then you continue to soldier on as if everything is fine.
Yes, exactly. You just keep going because that's what the adults around you do as well, and that's what society expects. And but when my brother died, it was my older brother. It was just before lockdown, and so in lockdown I was on my own, and I spent hours alone, and it was difficult to face grief in these circumstances, but it also gave me time to dive into the literature. And this is when I started to really try to understand through the lens of science, because the world seemed to crumble around me. Everything seemed to be falling apart. The loss of yet another family member, and then the world was closed and there was COVID everywhere. It was a very scary time. And for me, diving into the data was the one thing that was giving me a bit of meaning, and it was something that was holding me. The data, the figures, the research, the numbers. And that's when I realized that there is a way out. There is a way to regain agency. It was also validating from my own experience. I felt that I was not alone. Sometimes in grief, there are situations, emotions, reactions where you think, oh my God, am I bonkers? Am I mad? Am I losing it? Is this just me? Everyone seems to be holding it together. And then when you read the literature, you realize that actually this is an explicable behavior. This is an explicable reaction. Many people go through this, and it feels comforting somehow to be validated validated in your humanity, in your connection to other human beings who experience this as well. So science has helped me a lot. And then to develop really very pragmatic tools, because I like things that are pragmatic and, protocols. Just give me a hold. And realizing that there are ways I could regain agency was very empowering. And it also helped me to no longer see grief as the enemy. I realized grief was here because there has been love. Grief will always be here. It's like an old companion that is not always friendly, but it's just there. And I have to figure out ways to live with it without being always scared of it. And that's what I did. And it worked. And that's how I felt like maybe I needed to share this with other people going through the same process.
That is, what a gift. What a gift to be sharing it and to have really gone into researching it, wanting to understand, not just for yourself, but for humanity. What is it about grief? And so it is interesting to look at it scientifically. So grief isn't just the tears and the sadness, the emotional, it's neurological. So in what way does it affect the brain and the nervous system?
Yeah, so grief is perceived by the body and by the nervous system as a threat because our loved ones, they help us co-regulate. They are part of our identity and of our safety system. So when someone we love dearly, someone who's very close to us suddenly disappears, it's like a threat for the body because our safety is threatened. And there's a beautiful book written by Lisa Schulman. She's a neuroscientist. It's called Before and After Loss. And she explains things through the lens of neuroscience, and she was saying that grief hurts the brain like a physical injury would. It changes the physiology of the brain. So it really is measurable in the body. It increases inflammation. People who lose a loved one are at a much higher risk of a heart attack on the day of the loss, but then also during the following month. So this has all been measured, and this is data. And so once you understand that, it affects your body, I felt some people even talk about a grief face. I felt like puffy suddenly. I felt lethargic. I looked different and I didn't understand it. And I kept saying to my friends, I feel inflamed. I feel inflamed. There's something wrong with my body. And then I started reading the books by Dr. Mary Frances O'Connor, The Grieving Brain, The Grieving Body. And it was really a life-changing relief to understand that, yes, the body is affected as well. So that was super enlightening because then I thought, well, if it affects my body, maybe I can start with my body to feel better, and sometimes emotions are just too overwhelming, and thinking our way through grief or thinking about our grief can be too painful to handle. So I started looking after my body in very simple ways, just, ticking the basics, getting enough hydration, eating real foods, getting morning daylight to help my circadian rhythm to get better sleep, moving gently in nature, ideally outdoors, going for a walk or just stretching in a park, and then surrounding myself with people who were not draining my energy. And they were not necessarily the ones I would have thought at first. It's very surprising. Like most people who experience grief will understand that sometimes it's not your best friends or your closest family members who give you the most energy. Sometimes it's people you didn't think were that important in your life, but they turn out to be really helpful and soothing. So starting with the body, and because I'm a Pilates instructor, I use this a lot as well. And now I use it in my work. I use movement because moving slowly, breathing slowly is obviously good for the body for many reasons, but it also signals safety to the nervous system. So just learning how to use the body to create that safety will help the mind and will help the heart. And this is such a powerful tool that is accessible to anyone, tend to your body. That's probably my most important advice I would give to anyone grieving. Look after your body. You will do yourself a huge favor.
That it's so interesting. Many of the things that you've just said, the holistic suggestions for helping with my condition, because I was injured by the COVID vaccine, and it was just that my body couldn't take one more thing. And so my nervous system is in fight and flight all the time. So calming it down is very, very difficult. But just all of the things that you just said, but understanding that grief puts us into inflammation, right? And of course, and we've got the emotions that we're feeling. We're crying, we're trying to reduce our inflammation. We're angry, we're trying to express our inflammation. And then it's really, really interesting. And that explains why trying to force yourself through it doesn't work.
It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And I believe that these tools are helpful in any situation. And I'm glad, you share your experience as well, because whatever affects us in a way that feels threatening, a loss, an illness, a change of situation in life will affect the nervous system. And so if we learn how to tend to our bodies, we have skills for a lifetime. And then we can share these skills, with the younger generations as well. Because I feel like I don't have children of my own, but I feel like all the children are everyone's children. And so we do have a responsibility to also share this with the younger people around us and teach them these simple skills of looking after ourselves, after our body, breathing, moving, getting morning daylight for their well-being. And this is something we can go back to in any difficult situation. And there will be difficult situations. This is just nature of life. So being equipped for that is super helpful. I felt, understanding all these things, I felt very empowered, and I get very passionate and animated about them, because the beautiful thing is that they are accessible. You don't need to have a certain education or a certain amount of money, or like most of these things we can implement in our lives, and they're here for everyone. And our body's wisdom is way beyond our understanding, but we can really tap into it and trust it to do the work.
Yes. And we're just thinking about the mental health epidemic that we have at the moment, right? And the and what I mean about that is the dysfunction for people and the burnout. But if people are constantly experiencing grief about something and the nervous system is in inflammation and in the fight, flight or freeze state, then it is not surprising that it is difficult for us to make good decisions to look after ourselves for the best.
You're right. You're right. And yes, you're right. And there is a crisis. And this is why I think making it as simple as possible, just like one or two things, be it hydration and morning daylight, these two things will already make a big difference. An incredible scientist called Lisa Feldman Barrett, and she's specialized in emotions. And she talks about the body budget. That was also very enlightening. The body budget. And by that, she means that if our body budget is depleted, our emotions will be impacted. And sometimes we might feel sad simply because we are dehydrated or we didn't eat the right foods. So, and this is where this was also very insightful. So just managing our body budget for our mental well-being, that's just how it works.
Makes so much sense.
Doesn't it? Or if we haven't slept enough, we won't be as upbeat as we are when we had a good night's sleep.
That's right. I did not know until I started studying neuroscience. I didn't know what the brain did while we sleep. I did not know about the cleansing of the toxins, and I did not understand what it was doing. And I was not sleeping properly. So of course my brain was not detoxifying. So then I had more headaches and I had more anxiety and my nervous system was dysregulated. So of course, and we don't know it because probably many of us don't read the books that you are talking about.
Oh, I can only highly recommend them. They're so insightful. And I feel like we're at a day and age, we're very lucky that science is so accessible, straight from the scientists, straight from the people who do the research. And they write these books and they read these books. They're also, most of them, available in audio format, read by the author, which makes it even more exciting, I find, to listen to. Coming back to sleep, there is Matthew Walker, for example, who's done an amazing job in educating the general public about the importance of sleep, because up until recently, really, the lack of sleep or sleeping very little was almost glorified. You were always almost being labeled as lazy if you wanted to get your 8-9 hour sleep. But thanks to him, I think he's done a really great job at communicating that we now understand that we're really harming our health big time by not getting enough sleep. But then again, when grief hits or a life-changing event, like in your case, it's very hard to sleep well. Sleep is disrupted a lot. And this is where simple things like getting morning daylight will have an impact on regulating your circadian clock, and then having a bedtime routine. And again, at first, it's probably not going to give you the best night's sleep, but it's like going to the gym. If you go to the gym once or twice, your body is not going to look any different. You're not going to feel any different. But if you do that gym routine over and over and over again, you will feel and see the difference. And it's the same with these little practical tools that you can implement. Get morning daylight and have a little bedtime routine. Drink the same tea at the same time, light a candle, switch the lights, dim the lights, little things that just signal your brain, now is time to sleep. And then slowly through the body, you will find that you sleep a little better.
And I think when we have a beautiful relationship, when we have a caring relationship with our body, when we do these rituals, when we do honor our bodies with good food, hydration, and I like to think of it as self-fullness, right? So it's beyond self-care. It's filling ourselves with the things we need. Then we can be anything that we want to be because we have the energy. We have the resources within ourselves aren't being spent on hanging on to that grief or hanging on to the anger, because I suppose we have a budget of energy and what we spend our energy on.
Yes, and anger is energy. That's very true. Anger is energy, yes. And I think you mentioned it beautifully, that looking after ourselves and developing that relationship with ourselves, it goes through self-compassion. And self-compassion quite often makes people cringe. The idea of giving yourself love makes people cringe. And I found that in my work, the most efficient way to help people feel self-compassion for themselves is to use the people they love. So for example, parents, this works every time. If you ask a parent, how would you like your child to treat themselves? How would you like them to talk to themselves, to act towards themselves? So try to really feel that in your bones. What would you like for your child to, the self-compassion you would like for your child? And then try to tap into this and turn it towards you. So by bypassing, the self, you manage to make it more understandable and more reachable, that notion of self-compassion that is so important whenever life hits, whenever life gets difficult.
Yes. And before you said something about us being role models for the children, for the world's children. So imagine if as adults we showed that compassion accidentally for ourselves, but the children didn't know that it was an accidental thing, it was just a normal thing. Then the children, the next generation, have full access to self-compassion as a basic fundamental human thing, just like smiling and laughing and the joyous things that adults can forget.
That's so true. Wouldn't that be wonderful if the next generation could have that skill of self-compassion being innate from birth? That would be amazing. And I think we have a responsibility for that. And this is where it's almost a duty, isn't it, to learn how to apply it to ourselves so that children can take example. But it does make us cringe. And again, I will talk about a scientist who's a leading expert in self-compassion. Her name is Christine Neff, Neff. And I think her website is christineneff.com. And there are a lot of free resources on her website on practicing self-compassion and all the science, how self-compassion is not self-complacency. And when she started studying self-compassion, maybe 20 or 30 years ago, there wasn't even a proper scientific description of what self-compassion is. So she did pioneering work in that field. And again, I would recommend for everyone to have a look at the website because the resources are amazing. They've helped me a lot.
Self-compassion didn't have a scientific definition.
No, there was no proper definition that could be used in a rigorous scientific study.
Goodness.
Yes.
So, because compassion is such an important thing, and it is a thing that maybe is a little absent sometimes in the world when we have different points of view and conflict. But yeah, compassion is so important.
It is. And by nature, we are a very compassionate and kind species. The circumstances that change that, and often fear, fear and stress, that remove that ability. From an evolutionary perspective, we had to be caring, we had to be kind and look after each other because we wouldn't have survived. And because kindness was a matter of survival, Mother Nature gave us a very strong rewarding system. So it feels very good to be kind. We love being kind because we feel good for it. So by nature, we are kind. We're not selfish. I think it's Einstein who said, no one was born evil. There's no evil baby. Life makes us so.
Yes, yes. So with your work with people with their grief, do you work with people who are going through different phases, like different career phases and job change, as well as loss of family and friends?
My work is essentially based on, losing a loved one, and that for people who need to show up, and usually after a few years, after a year or two, when the world keeps going and everyone around you thinks you're fine, but you sense that something is off and you're not quite yourself and you can't quite be and do what you used to. That's when I help to really reset and share the tools and also acknowledge, the situation. So people who are grieving, who are a few years in, but who need to show up and to perform and to be there. And that can be, in the corporate world, high performers, but that can be mums. Mum is a very demanding job. That can be carers, people who can't, who care for others. That's also very demanding. So people who have no choice really, but to show up and do what needs to be done, but are still struggling inside. That's where I can help.
Yes, yes. And I think we would be, like most people would have unresolved grief.
Yes, grief comes in many, many shapes. And again, I really think that the tools I'm sharing and the insights I'm sharing, they're applicable to any situation in life. You end up with a toolkit that helps you go through life and feel empowered. And, I sometimes feel like I know life will bring more challenges and also a lot of happiness, but it will bring more challenges, but I feel ready. And I also sense that now that I've developed these tools and I apply them to myself, I can be there for others. I noticed that, for many years, I couldn't be there for others as much as I wanted to because I wasn't well. I wasn't well enough. And now, there have been things lately last year in my family, and I felt so grateful that I could be there really. And it didn't take the energy out of me. It energized me to be able to be there for others. And that was a big shift. And in that sense, it's super empowering to regain agency because you can not only help yourself, but you have the energy to help others. And that's what life is about,
Yes, yes. And to notice the difference between that, right? To be able to see that there is a difference between pushing through and truly being able to be present.
Exactly.
To not lose your energy, that is really,
yes,
that is huge.
Even in difficult times. And and I was going to say to not lose your energy even in difficult times. And this is reassuring, empowering, and it is possible. And I think that most of us going through a challenge, we might have the feeling that this is not accessible, but it is really through simple practices, simple accessible tools. We can have that agency and know that whatever life throws at us, we will be able somehow to handle and not lose ourselves in the process.
We do have access. So you shared something powerful with me when we first spoke. So grief used to rule my life, but now I'm the boss.
Yes, I like to say that. I'm the boss now.
Yeah.
I'm the boss and I decide.
Yeah. So yes. And
yes.
Well, you seem like a gentle boss, but yeah, so what does that look like in day-to-day living?
Yes, so that's something I love to share because, again, I'm all for pragmatic solutions and behaviors and things that, make sense and that really anyone can use. So when I say that grief used to rule my life, it's that I was constantly for decades bracing for the next wave, for the next grief bomb to hit, and it could be anywhere. So it even changed my behaviors. I stopped reading novels completely. I stopped going to the movies. I stopped. I didn't want to go out in cafes anymore because anything could trigger. Anything, a picture, a song, a smell, a word, anything could be a trigger, and I could not control these triggers. They would be so powerful that I would have to leave the room, hide in the bathroom, cry my eyes out, and it felt very it was like a constant threat, and I felt like I was a victim. There was nothing I could do. It could just come ambush me and jump at me out of nowhere. And then when my older brother died before COVID, that's when I got really angry, and I thought, enough is enough. Enough is enough. I do not want to spend my life being ambushed by grief so randomly. So now what I do, and what I recommend the people I work with to do, it sounds very surprising, but trust me, it works. It's incredible. When a grief wave comes, when you feel that you're being triggered, my response now is to say, see you, I hear you, I know you are here. I talk to my grief. I know you are here, but now is not the right time. Not now. Not now. And this is very powerful. Not now. So what do I do with that? I then plan it. I make an appointment with myself, and I will tell my grief, I will look after you. I will let you in Thursday evening at 8, and then I'll put the candles out, the sad music. I look at pictures. I look at videos, and I will know that this is the time I will let grief in. I will get it through me. I will cry. I will be sad. I will feel all the emotions, but it's in my own terms. It's when I decide. And again, this is not something that happens overnight. Like, grief triggers don't just stop jumping at you. But it's the same analogy as the gym. If you do that over and over and over again, you train your brain, and then you create space. So it's really important not to ignore it. Don't just say not now and push it aside. Accept that it will happen. The pain will go through you. But if you feel that you have a little bit more power and decision making over when it hits you, it's a big game changer. And then from that moment, I stopped seeing grief as an enemy. I stopped seeing pain as being dangerous. I understood that this was just part of the process, and I can handle it, and I accept it, and I can go through that. But I decide when. So I'm the boss now. I'm the boss.
It is that is such a gift for our listeners to get given this strategy. It makes so much sense to me. Like,
it does, doesn't it? Yeah.
It's like everything else we make an appointment for.
Exactly. Right? But we go to it. We show up at the appointment. That's important, even if it's an uncomfortable one.
Yeah, well, that's right. Especially once we've built up the trust, the nervous system and your ego, and your ego is only trying to protect you anyway. So your nervous system and your ego will learn trust if you keep your word.
Yes.
So it is about keeping your word. So let's just repeat those steps again. So when the emotion comes up, when the trigger happens.
Yes. When you feel
feel the trigger.
Helpless, when you feel helpless, I used to be scared. I used to think, oh my God, it's coming at me. It's happening again. And it would scare me. And when it happens, you acknowledge it, and you just say to yourself, not now. Not now. Now is not the right time. I will meet you later. And again, it doesn't happen. It doesn't work the first time, the second time, the third time. It's a process, and you have to trust the process and repeat it over and over again. And the time will come where this will work, and you will remain calm and composed, and you will be able to say, okay, I see you. I see you, but I will look after you later.
Yes. Oh, that is such a gift. So is it based on that you were able to then realize that you could coexist the grief with joy rather than having them cancel each other out and have, the joy lost?
Yes, and that notion of impermanence of emotions. I mean, impermanence is everywhere, but the impermanence of emotions, and that the emotions are not me, and the emotions are not monsters, that every emotion is welcome. And if I learn to look at them, to face them, to name them, they're way less scary, and then all of them have their place. Like I said, grief and pain are no longer enemies. I can name them now. I can say, oh, hey, here you are. And it's the same with sadness, anxiety, fear, doubt. I can say, oh, here you are. I know you. I've seen you before, I've met you before, and there has been an after. You were here, but then you left again. And it's just really getting familiar with our emotions. Naming them is an incredible tool. Again, it's super pragmatic, sounds boring, but the better the words, the more precise the words you use for your emotions, the better your emotional intelligence. And this will then help you just manage them better, not being overwhelmed by them. Emotions are just this, they're like energy in motion, and they will pass. And there's a beautiful saying by a Buddhist monk, a woman, who says that emotions are like the weather. They are like clouds in the sky, but we are the sky. The sky doesn't change. Emotions are the weather, ever changing. Sometimes it's sunny, sometimes it's rainy, but there's always the same sky behind, and it's the same for us. We are the sky, our emotions are the weather, and we can handle that.
Yeah.
And if I may share another name of someone who's doing incredible work with emotions at Yale. I think it's even called the Center for Emotions at Yale. And his name is Dr. Mark Brackett. He's written amazing books. One of them is Permission to Feel. There is even an app that teaches you how to label your emotions and how that helps you. So if any of your listeners is interested in that, it's Mark. I will send you the links to all these people because their work has been life-changing for me, and it's accessible. They put a lot of free stuff out there as well. It's wonderful.
And I think it is wonderful to see that universities are researching this element, and it's not all about AI and space travel. That there are some things being studied that can help us live more complete lives.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly it. That's exactly it. And understanding that we have access to that, we can all implement these things. They're not difficult as such. They just need repetition and consistency, like anything, beneficial, but they are accessible.
So when somebody's nervous system has been running in the grief cycle for years, so would you suggest the process that you've just told us as being one of the first things to try, and with patients, for them to be able to understand possibly the difference between managed and not managed?
Yes, that's actually the key point here. I'm glad you mentioned that, because you see, I really think grief is like a wound, and some wounds will heal on their own over time. And surprisingly, again, there have been studies done. Surprisingly, most people are resilient and will go through their grief. Doesn't mean that it's not painful, but they will manage through their grief. But some wounds don't heal on their own. And when they don't heal on their own, they don't just stay the way they are. They fester. It gets worse. So it's that would be the first self-reflection. If you've been into your grief for a few years now, ask yourself, does it feel like it's getting better slowly over time? Or is it not getting better? Because if it's not, then you really want to seek help, to find a professional or a community group, or don't be on your own. Like, don't be isolated, seek for help, reach out but if you find, that's the first thing really, that it's slowly getting better. And sometimes a very good way to realize that is to keep a journal. That's also something I recommend to most people to do. Grief can feel over-consuming, overpowering, and utterly present. And it can feel like it's painful all the time, every day, all day long. And so journaling helps to soften this notion a little bit. When you journal, okay, when was grief the most intense today? When did it soften? What happened around these moments? And if you do that, you end up seeing a pattern. Not only do you realize that, well, actually, it's not all the time. I have been smiling. I did enjoy my hot cup of tea. I did love looking at the birds playing outside. You will realize that there were moments where grief softened a little bit, and you will also see what might have triggered it, what might have helped, and just that maybe over time it's less and less. So journaling, and just, you don't need to write an essay, but just noticing, when was it the most intense? When was it less intense? What happened around these times? That is very helpful. Just that self-observation.
I think, coming from being a data professional over the last 40 years, I think it is vitally important for us to check in with our patterns, and by keeping a journal, even just asking yourselves a question, that you just suggested, even if you weren't to write it down, you still have got, a bit of a catalogue, a bit of a data capture of what's going on. And so sometimes when we say those general statements like always, it always happens this way, well, then you can question, is it always? Do
Exactly.
I always feel like this, right? But you can't question an always statement if you don't have some data
Exactly.
to prove, right? So it is, and I know that often when we're grieving or we're in pain, we numb ourselves. We create diversions, maybe live in addictions to avoid that pain.
Yes.
But it is all a step to reclaiming that the self that the people we're grieving would want us to be.
That's true. That's so true. That is so true. And you're right, there is sometimes a tendency of numbing ourselves, or so it's that constant movement between sympathetic system, where we are hypervigilant and irritable, and and then the parasympathetic nervous system, where we're trying to numb, where we feel lethargic, and this brings us back to a concept that is called the window of tolerance. And the work I do is trying to help people learn how to remain within their window of tolerance. So we have a window of tolerance in which we can manage the stress of our life, because there will always be stress, and it doesn't necessarily have to be negative, but there will always be, ups and downs. And if we are within our window of tolerance, we will be able to manage these different stresses in life. That window of tolerance can shrink when life gets hard, like a pandemic, an illness, grief, and it can expand when life is a bit more generous. But if we go above that window of tolerance, we're going to be irritable, restless, struggle to sleep, get angry easily. And if we are below that window of tolerance, we feel lethargic, sad, we have no energy, no motivation, nothing is appealing. So it's about learning how not to go above or below, and to remain within that window of tolerance. And all the tools I suggested during our conversation will help remain within that window of tolerance. And that makes life more enjoyable, because we can remain present. We can remain present in the moment.
Yes. And ultimately, a lot of our anxiety and our sadness comes from living not in the present.
Yes.
It's imagining what's coming in the future, or it's yearning for what happened in the past. So
Yes.
if we're able to find different ways to have greater awareness and, the window of tolerance.
Exactly.
That sounds, I can see that. I can see when I'm below the windowsill that I'm, and now I can work out some strategies for what to do there.
Exactly. And we are all different. So it's really important to dare to try different things. Just try different things and see what works for you in this moment. And this might change, over time. It might not always be the same thing that helps, but it's worth trying out different things. And just, what works for your best friend or for your mom is not going to be working for you necessarily. So there's no right or wrong. Whatever helps you, and just stick to that.
Yeah. And that's it. The important thing is know that you're an individual. We aren't yet clones. We are not those, I'm seeing the Star Wars, the soldiers. We're not those
Yes.
people. As human beings, we've got choice, haven't we?
Yes, more than we think. We have more choice, more agency than we think we have. We are not victims, and we can really reclaim, also by accepting that, life doesn't owe us anything. Things happen. We might feel that they are unfair, but I mean, at the end of the day, is it worth even, questioning these things that we can't change, whether they're fair or unfair? They are what they are, and we need to, like roll up our sleeves and see how we can handle this, and honor life. This is something that grief has taught me as well. When I turned 45, which was the age at which both my dad and my brother died, I knew it was going to be a very special birthday, not a sad one, but one that I wanted to honor, because I felt that from that day onwards, I would experience life they did not have the chance to experience. And it really grew in me that notion of honoring life for them. I want to honor life by being present, by being grateful, by being good. And that starts by learning to know ourselves and figuring out what works for us and what helps us to stay in the present moment, to regulate our nervous system so that we can be that good person and so that we can honor life that is given to us.
The world is a better place for having people like you
Oh, thank you so much.
who have
Right back at
lived
you.
the work and thank you and do the work. I can imagine, and I'm sure that all the listeners can imagine with time with you and with the peacefulness of your voice and the calmness of you. I wish you lived around the corner. It'd be very good.
We could meet up for a coffee.
That's right. But yeah, it is so special. So if you had one last thing to say for now, just for now, for the people listening who have found themselves leaning in to this conversation and feeling understood and supported and helped, is there something that you feel that's necessary to say to them now?
Yes, there's really one bit of advice that I love to share that I have mentioned already, and it's boringly pragmatic, but when everything feels too much, look after your body, because this doesn't require emotional presence. This doesn't require extra energy. This is probably the most basic thing you can do. Just pick the foods, hydrate, get morning daylight, a bit of time in nature. Trust your body to be there for you. Our bodies are our home. Their wisdom is beyond our understanding, and we can always use the body to help the heart and the soul.
Yeah. Yes. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much. So grief doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It means something mattered. Sylvia reminds us that grief is not a failure of strength. It is a sign of connection, of love, of being human in a world that keeps changing. This conversation isn't about fixing grief. It's about learning how to listen to the body, soften the nervous system, and meet life with greater kindness and capacity. If this episode stirred something in you, take your time, pause, breathe. Let what landed settle gently. You can explore Sylvia's work, writing and courses at sylviawolfer.com or connect with her on LinkedIn. Thank you for being here. And remember, you are not broken because life changed you. Until next time, this is Suddenly Different. Thank you so much, Sylvia.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the work you do. It's so necessary and so precious. Thank you.
This has been Suddenly Different. I'm Leigh-Anne Charland, and I'm so grateful you shared your time with me. If you felt a spark, a tear, or a moment of recognition, I hope you'll pass that gift along by sharing this show. Take a deep breath, trust your path, and I'll meet you back here soon.